What's going on, everybody? It's EricRayweather back here, and in today's video I'm going to be breaking down the recent interview from former EA employee and former Madden creative director Rex Dickson. He just recently did a podcast with Dub.W, which I will link below in the description. It's a very long but very informative and good listen. I'm going to break down the important things from the interview that pertain to Madden and the current state of Madden. He goes into a lot of topics and sheds a lot of light on things like DDA, why the gameplay is bad, how it was working at EA, how he feels the game of Madden should be versus what the people at the top feel it should be. There's a lot of good stuff here. We're going to get into it. I'm going to timestamp each topic below in the comments, so if there's a certain thing that you want to hear Rex's take on or the information that he has, you can just click those timestamps and get right to it. So let's get into it. The first big question that Rex is asked is, who is Madden made for? Who is the target audience? Rex says, each department has a different target audience. The executive producer of Madden Ultimate Team has a much different audience that he needs to cater to than the executive producer for Longshot or Franchise. When you have a game like Madden, which is top 5 selling in North America, you want to target the largest audience possible. You want to target casuals, core players, competitive gamers, simulation gamers, etc. In order for Madden to remain successful, I think the focus needs to become tighter, because they are spreading their resources too thin by trying to please everybody. And when you try to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. So for me, I think the focus on the core community is what's needed, because those are the people who are loyal and buy the game every year. Now, this is, basically what Madden has become over the past few years. They make changes for the competitive guys, for the sim guys, for the arcade guys. They introduce the new game styles and new features that caters to each type of player, but everybody, we all seem to dislike the game. Competitive players feel the skill gap is too small. Sim players feel the game doesn't replicate real football. Casuals feel that there's not enough to do. And I believe this is one of the main reasons Rex left EA. If you follow him on Twitter or watch his interviews he has done, he seems to have wanted to put the main focus on the core community and fixing the gameplay, whereas the people at the top of EA didn't necessarily agree with that vision. The next question he gets asked is, how much control did you have over the game? Now, I'm not going to quote him directly here because it was really more of a long-winded type of answer, but what he basically said was each department gets to pitch the ideas that they want to implement for that year. Everybody can't get everything they want because there's a limited amount of resources to go around. The executives ultimately decide what pitches or ideas they want to go with. What's most marketable, what ideas do they think will sell the most copies of the game that year. And, they may like many ideas, but once the allotted resources are distributed, that's it. So you may have some good ideas they kind of keep putting on the back burner for years, and it takes a while before they're actually, able to get implemented. So it's not really up to them what gets implemented. It's all they can do is pitch the ideas. The same thing goes for us game changers. People often say that we aren't changing the game, or that they need better game changers. Our position is much of the same. All we can do is pitch ideas, give them feedback, but there's a long chain of command that stuff has to go through. We have no say in what actually gets implemented into the game. Next, Rex goes on to speak about the metas of Madden and how the gameplay is very copycat, with most people running the same or similar things. Dubby also asks Rex, well, how is that any different than the NFL, which is a copycat league? So Rex says, social media really took off during my time at EA. It's something we didn't really see coming with YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. You see the gameplay become more condensed into everybody running the same things. The gameplay isn't at a point yet where you can have an effective counter to every single thing. When certain routes become money routes and certain formations become just what you play, it's because EA hasn't invested enough into the counter behaviors that are necessary in order to ensure that every single offensive concept has a defensive counter. That's something that Clint and I talked about all the time. Now I'm from the old school where, we had glitches like you wouldn't believe. Things far worse than we see today, and there's always a counter for anything gameplay related. There's always a way to stop a route or a blitz or whatever the case. With what Rex said, though, is still true. It's still right, because even though there are ways to counter these metas, most of these counters shouldn't be as difficult as they are. There should be coverages to stop every concept, just like in real life. If you call the right coverage, then that money route shouldn't get open because it's not supposed to. That's definitely an area of the game that still needs a lot of work. The next big question he is asked is the game made for little Johnny down the block? What that question means is the game made for anybody to be able to compete? Is the game, being dumbed down, essentially? He says, when we started the Madden competitive series, one of the things that was brought up to me by an executive was that if we're going to invest in esports and put all of this money into this thing, they wanted the game to be less complicated. They wanted to make sure it wasn't just the top 1% who could lurk. That's what birthed the ball hawk feature. That's what birthed nano detection. trying to make sure that competitive Madden was accessible to a larger amount of people because of the investment that was being made into the competitive scene. If we're going to invest in this, the gameplay team needs to go out of their way to make sure that everybody feels that they have a chance to compete. Rex would then go on to describe the Madden 16 championship. Madden 16 was the year of the aggressive catch, when you could just throw a ball up, hold the catch button, and pretty much, moss anybody, especially if you had a good wide receiver or a tight end. The guy that won the game that year, won the championship, made a few of those big catches in the game. Not to take credit away from him, because it's certainly not the only reason he won, but it was a big factor in the game. Everybody used it that year because it was effective. Rex said after that game he knew that he had, quote, effed up. But he said that shortly after that, his boss came to him and tells him how much fun his nephew has just lobbing streaks to Gronkowski and aggressive catching on everybody. He said that he realized right then that he can't please both sides, but the fact that his boss was thrilled about the way the game was playing, it kind of meant that he had to roll with it, even though he knew it was damaging the high-level competitive play. He said that he knew they were pushing the game in the wrong direction, and he wanted to kind of shift, but EA didn't share his opinion. Now, that's something that, a lot of us knew to be true, but it hurts to hear a former employee actually say it. We knew the game had become a lot more, bum-friendly over the past few years. Ballhawk making it easier for anybody to be a good user defender, nano detection picking up blitzes for you, eliminating the timing and the catch system, so on and so forth. The thing is, this doesn't make the little Johnnies of the world able to compete with the best, because the best players still rise to the top every year, but it definitely allows those lesser skilled players to win games that they otherwise shouldn't, or, make games close when they should, be blowouts. It definitely does add to the fluky nature of Madden. Rex goes on to speak about formations like Gun Bunch and why they're so effective in Madden. He says, the coverage is less likely to have an effective response on compressed sets. It comes down to flaws in the defensive AI or rules that don't exist in our AI yet. This is what allows compressed sets to be more effective than other things. So what happens is, people just abandon the other things and use what's most effective. If you say, well, what kind of investment would it take to make sure that compressed sets are as well defended as the other sets? It's massive. There's multiple features, multiple systems, multiple AI behaviors. I know EA is working on that stuff, but it's going to come slowly because they're working on other things at the same time that are more marketable than fundamental football. So basically, again, going back to one of the reasons Rex left EA, he cares more about the fundamental football and gameplay more than his bosses do. The guys at the top want you to work on what's marketable to the masses, and what's marketable to the masses is not, hey, we've made defense better to defend compressed sets. So those fixes come a lot slower. Rex is then asked about the difficulties of the release date and how Madden has limited time to be developed and it needs to come out on time each year. He says, it's not really about how much time you have because it's a fixed quantity, you know what it is, and you can take a set amount of work and fit it into that bubble. The problem was when marketing comes in or executives come in and says, I don't know if there's enough back-of-box features. Then they start to inflate it and they call an audible. You're halfway through the year, you're executing just fine on what you wanted to, and then someone comes in and says, someone comes in and says, no, do this instead. That blows things up, that continues, or that becomes a problem, because now you start chasing something else. It pulls resources away from what you were focusing on. They are ultimately trying to make this long list of features because they're worried that if the feature list is small, then people won't come back. So now they're stuck in this cycle of believing that the longer the list is, the more likely it is that people will come back. But unfortunately, a long feature list does not mean a good game. So when you're trying to chase all these ideas instead of just focusing on trying to make the best football game possible, it distracts you. Even before my time, they had this saying called one and done, where we put features in and then the following year or two they go away because they don't care about it anymore because they already marketed it to you and they can't sell you the same feature again next year. Once it becomes out of the back of the box marketing focus, it loses all of its emphasis. They can put millions and millions of dollars into long shot and market the crap out of it, and in 2 years it's going to be gone. And it's like, well, what did you get out of that investment? And to them it's, well, we sold plenty of copies of the game the years that it existed. Instead of investing in the long-term future, they unfortunately don't think about building these long-term initiatives because they want to see an immediate payoff by building these big back-of-box stories every year. So this is just classic EA. You put stuff in the game, you take it away, you might sell it back to them years and years later. This is really telling that the people at the top are only focused on short-term success year to year, instead of building something that can grow and be better 10 years from now. Definitely a troubling thing to hear. So up next, Rex is asked about patches. Why so many? How do they decide what to patch, etc.? And he says, the patch terror sort of started with Madden Ultimate Team. Live service gaming is all about retention. Keeping you playing is essential to the Ultimate Team business. That's why patching the game so often became a thing. We were trying to retain as many users as possible for as long as possible. And then after that, he kind of goes into talking about how they get feedback from social media, from competitive players, from game changers, and basically their job is to kind of notice the patterns coming from each phase, you know, each section of the community, what's consistent with each group, and kind of attack those things first. He briefly goes on to talk about Longshot and how he didn't think it was what they needed to focus on. He says, when we were, when they were pitching stories, cinematics, and Longshot, I said, I don't think this is what our core users want. The feedback I see tells me that the community wants us to focus on core gameplay. What the community doesn't understand is a lot of the people who make the decisions and control the resources are not on social media. He basically goes on to say that the people who do control everything view feedback on social media as a vocal minority, whereas guys like him and Clint Odenberg, who put themselves out there on social media, they view the feedback as a good sample of what the core community wants. He says that there's a lot of misalignment because on one hand they want to sell copies, but on the other hand they want to retain people as well. If you invest all this money in a Longshot and it's over in 6 hours, you're not retaining the people who bought the game because of Longshot. And he basically says in order to retain people, you need a long-term plan to improve the product so that people want to play the game because it's actually good and not just because of a certain feature. Up next, a big question. Are the DDA rumors true? Is there anything in the game that helps little Johnny when he's getting his butt kicked? And Rex says, I actually had an engineer look through the code to tell me if anything like that existed, and the God's to honest truth is there is really no such thing as DDA. I know it feels that way sometimes. I feel if you average your experience out across all of your games, the ones you win, the ones you lose, I think you'll find it's fairly balanced in terms of outcomes. We talk a lot about how fluke determines the outcomes of games. That's not DDA. The code is just not that smart. It's never trying to determine who should win based on some type of momentum or whatever. From my experience and what I know from talking to engineers and from what I've seen while I was there, there's no such thing as DDA. Now, me myself, I've spoken about DDA on this channel before. I don't think it's in the game. You know, people bring up the patent that EA has for it and kind of run with that, but that doesn't mean that it's actually implemented into the game. And that also doesn't mean that it won't be implemented at some point either, because it might. I don't think Rex has any reason to lie here, especially since he's been very vocal about how he feels about the direction of Madden and what EA does, and he's revealed a lot since he's left. I think it just goes back to what he said earlier. The game is easier now. The game is made to be flukier now so that everybody can compete. You know, people often say that Madden developers are terrible and couldn't code a good game to save their life, but then also turn around and say they're brilliant enough to implement something so incredibly complex as DDA that can adjust on the fly and help determine outcomes based on what's happening on a play-to-play basis. That just doesn't make sense to me. If you think that they're bad at getting even the smallest things right, which is true a lot of the time, well, how could you think they're good enough to get the hardest thing perfect, such as DDA? That's just my take on it. Rex is then asked what led to him parting ways with EA. He said, it started in Madden 17. After Madden 16, when I had the feeling we were moving the game in the wrong direction and wanted to shift, I didn't get a lot of support. There was a lot of top-down pressure to continue to invest in accessibility and making the game less complicated. Killing the skill gap was not going to be an effective way to move the game forward. The arrival of Frostbite, which ended up taking a lot of resources away from the team, and the arrival of Longshot, which I had fundamental disagreement with in terms of its investment cost and investment priority, it really put me at odds with a lot of the decision makers. It got to the point where I told them, if you're not going to let me make, the game I want, take the gameplay in the direction I want to go, then I don't know what I'm doing here. So then Rex asked, what ideally, did you want to do with Madden? He said, I wanted to invest heavily into core gameplay and features and fix the foundation. I even suggested that we take a year off from building new features and just clean the game up, fix the top legacy issues. But with a company that's as marketed driven as EA, you're not going to get much support if you say, I want to take a year off and just fix the game. They want the big, flashy back-of-box features. When I first got there, I was pitching this, and I got stopped in the middle of my pitch and told, stop pitching me about what you want to fix. Give me something that I can sell. and that attitude is pervasive across the producer ranks. None of them are excited about what you can fix, they only want to know what they can sell. So again, here we see the same kind of theme. Rex wanted to focus with the core community and the loyal supporters. He wanted to fix the gameplay and invest in the long-term life of the game, but the people above him didn't see it that way. And you know, when he left, a lot of people were happy about it, and I said, you know, this isn't a good thing. You know, we just lost one of the good guys who actually does fight for what we want, and I don't think a lot of people realized it then, but I think more people are starting to realize it now. Rex is then asked, where does he think Madden should go, and where does he think, you know, it will go? And then Rex says, from what I've heard, I think they're still focused on capturing new customers. There's this pervasive attitude that the core consumer, the Madden heads, will come back and buy the game no matter what we do. So let's focus on the casuals and growing the mass market audience versus let's focus on making sure our most loyal diehard consumers are happy with the product that we're putting out. That's where the disagreement between myself and many others is. They're trying to grow the brand and the business by attracting new users, whereas I think they really needed to focus on satisfying the customers that we already have. Now, to wrap up the interview, Rex is asked, you know, does he think Madden would benefit from competition? And then Rex says, I think if 2K announced tomorrow that they had secured the NFL license and were starting to work on a football game, would it change the development strategy of Madden? Unquestionable. I don't know that things would get better, or how they would be different, but I think it would make EA corporate double down on their investment, and that would be a good thing for Madden. But it's not very realistic because the amount of time it would take for someone to build an engine and a framework to compete with Madden, it would be a long and expensive process. And with the profit margins being impacted by the price of the NFL licenses and all the other associated costs and risks that you have, it will be a monumental undertaking. Maybe 2K could pull it off, but very few other companies could ever even have that kind of capital to take a crack at it. Now, I've said the same thing in my other videos, and I'm glad somebody as experienced as Rex spoke on this. You know, just because 2K5 and All Pro Football 2K8 were good fundamental football games, that doesn't mean that 2K could just jump up tomorrow and develop a game quickly that could compete with Madden. There's over a decade of catch-up time, and it would just be a huge task for any company, period. One last thing Rex mentions is his support of the current league gameplay guy, Clint Odenberg. Clint is, you know, often the guy that takes a lot of blame, but Rex ensures that he is the right guy for the job. Rex says, there's no guy in that building I'd rather have in charge of gameplay than Clint. In terms of being a champion for the core community and what they're looking for, if Clint leaves, there's very few people that could step up and fill that gap. Clint is the right guy, and it is critical that you support him. God forbid he ever leaves, he is sort of the last man defending what we have left and what's good and right about the direction of the game. Now, myself, I definitely second that. If you respect Rex, well, Clint is kind of like Rex Jr. He cares more than you could ever imagine, and he is indeed fighting for what's right. And I hope this interview further shed light on where the problems really lie with Madden, and it's at the top, like I've always said. It's a leadership problem. It's not a developer problem. These guys are forced to do things a certain way, and they keep fighting little by little to make the game better, you know, where they're allowed to fit these things in, and they continue to fight, you know, for the game to be headed in the right direction. So I hope this interview was informative. Like I said, link to the entire thing will be below. He covers a lot of other things in this interview as well. These are just what I thought were the most important things. I'll have the timestamps in the comments below. As I said, hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I will see you guys next time.